President Trump calls Colorado's elections crooked and suggests Republicans should seize control of elections nationwide.
I don't think they'd give two about violating federal law to get after their own aim.
I'll have a word about why it's time to believe President Trump. Did a guardrail fail on I-70, leading to a terrible crash with the youth hockey team's van? Or was it simply no match for an out-of-control snowplow?
With the plow, it's going to be a tough capture.
And the challenge of convincing hard-working folks in the high country to accept help as they struggle to get by in this brutal winter season. But we won't just watch. Together, we can help, because this is next. President Trump has come right out and said that some of his punishment of Colorado is due to our mail-in ballots, which he claims are rigged. And now he's talking about seizing control of elections from blue states across the country. Trump said this week that he wants Republicans to take over elections in select states. He talked about the federal government nationalizing elections. Today, MAGA advisor Steve Bannon called for the Army and ICE to be deployed to polling places. Our Marshall Zellinger looks at the clear goal here.
I don't think they'd give two about violating federal law to get after their own aim.
Tell us what you really think, Matt Crane. The head of the Colorado County Clerks Association, a Republican himself, Crane is vocal in his opposition against President Trump, saying this.
The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting.
Let's face it, what they want to do is suppress voter turnout amongst all groups. That's the goal here, right?
Crane is among the rare Republicans pushing back on the push to give the federal government more power over state-run elections. Steve Bannon, the MAGA advisor for Trump, called for even more federal presence around elections.
We're going to have ICE surround the polls come November.
Another lie that is facilitating bad policy by this administration is that we have lots of non-citizens who are voting. We don't have that. The data continually shows that.
Crane, who was Arapahoe County clerk from 2015 to 2018, also took exception to Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson's comments about vote counting. Johnson seemed to think that California results were fraudulent, where Republicans were in the lead on election night, but lost their lead as valid ballots were still counted after election night.
We had 3 House Republican candidates who were ahead on election day in the last election cycle. And every time a new tranche of ballots came in, they just magically whittled away until their leads were lost. It looks on its face to be fraudulent. Can I prove that? No.
It's not fraud. It's just the way the electorate works.
In 2018, Crane lost his clerk's race, even though he was in the lead on election night and beyond.
I was up, I think until 2 days after. And I knew with the first posting on election night, when I wasn't up by a certain amount, I knew I was going to lose. It was just a matter of us counting the votes that were legally cast to getting to the end result.
His message to Colorado's congressional delegation, particularly the 4 Republican members, show your spine.
Stand up for Colorado. That's what we sent you there to do. So go and be good, solid conservative Republicans and stand up for states' rights and for what we do here.
We've reached out to all members of the Colorado congressional delegation. We only heard back from one of the 4 Republicans. It was Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. Our questions were, do you think that the election should be nationalized?
Yep.
We really didn't get an answer even from Boebert on the specific questions we had related to what you just saw.
In the Constitution, election administration is left to the states. However, the courts have said that Congress, not the president, Congress has some role here. Colorado's Democrats are obviously going to vote no. It would really be up to the Republicans who are in the majority to decide how much control they would cede to the president if he says, I want this, this, and this.
And as you heard from Matt Crane, stand up for Colorado is what his Republican message is to the Republicans in Congress.
Majority of his clerks in Colorado are Republicans.
Correct.
All right. Marshall Zellinger, thank you. It's time to start believing President Trump. For everyone to start believing President Trump. Democrats, Republicans, independents, the media, believe him when he talks about the issue that is at the core of his being. That election results he doesn't like are rigged and should not be respected. Believe him when he talks about Republicans seizing control of elections in blue states or the federal government taking over elections in violation of the Constitution. Or, as MAGA advisor Steve Bannon's now suggesting, that the military and ICE should be sent to polling places in swing states. Because for Americans of every political persuasion who support free and fair elections, the simple step of believing President Trump makes the unprecedented and the unconceivable not just possible, but obvious. It was obvious in the run-up to 2020 as well. Even if Republicans dismissed it, many in the media avoided it, and even if leading Democrats weren't prepared for it. Like when I asked Senator Bernie Sanders 6 years ago this month, 9 months before the 2020 election, Do you have any concern that he might try to stay in power if he loses in 2020?
Well, then you're talking about, obviously a very, very dangerous moment in American history. So at this point, what we are trying to do, and I believe we will succeed, is bring millions of people together to engage in the strongest grassroots campaign this country has ever seen. I believe we are going to defeat Donald Trump.
Winning alone was obviously not a sufficient strategy for what followed. Bernie Sanders did not want to speculate about what Trump would do to stay in power in 2020. Hopefully, Democrats are over that delusion by now. Hopefully, Republicans who value democracy and the rule of law are similarly clear-eyed. And hopefully, journalists find more courage for clear talk about what could be coming to America. Because it's time for all of us to believe President Trump. The parents of the Evergreen High School shooter are not going to face criminal charges. Jefferson County Sheriff's Office says it has now wrapped up its investigation into the shooting. In September of last year, a student at Evergreen High shot and injured 2 classmates, then killed himself. The Sheriff's Office says investigators were not able to talk to the shooter's parents, which made it hard to determine how the student got access to the revolver. Last month, the parent's attorney sent a letter to the investigators saying the gun was a family heirloom and was stored in a gun safe that was only opened by the shooter's father. Investigators say they did not find the parents' DNA on the gun. The Sheriff's Office says they did not have enough evidence to charge the parents for providing access to a firearm to a juvenile. That would have been a crime. The case now stays closed unless there's new evidence. The 2 students injured in that shooting are out of the hospital. One of them requires 24/7 medical care. Colorado State Patrol is investigating whether a guardrail on I-70 failed when a snowplow went through it last week, crashed into a van carrying a youth hockey team, killing the driver, one of the dads. Our Evan Krugel went to the crash site looking for more answers and found nothing to stop another crash there.
Colorado's interstates are filled with protective barriers designed to keep drivers from crossing over medians and into oncoming traffic. Most are made out of concrete or steel, but on I-70 near the Eisenhower Tunnel, a cable barrier now rests on the ground. 5 days after a snowplow crossed over the median, killing the driver of a van carrying a hockey team from California.
We are very, very fortunate. It could have been much worse, and luck is not a safety strategy.
Steve Eimers is now known as the guardrail guy after losing his daughter Hannah in a guardrail-related crash 10 years ago in Tennessee. He says more and more communities are turning to these cable barriers, mainly because they cost less than half of a concrete one.
Cable barrier has revolutionized roadside safety in that it can be deployed quickly and relatively inexpensively in rural communities.
CDOT shared this video a few years ago, showing the barriers catching cars and even slowing down a semi-truck. It remains unclear if this cable was maintained properly before the crash, because CDOT won't tell us. But we found loose or grounded cable for hundreds of feet near the crash site today.
If the cable is loose or lying on the ground, it is non-functional. It cannot do its job, and that entire area is at that point vulnerable to a crossover collision.
CDOT would not answer any of my questions about that cable barrier today, citing that ongoing investigation by State Patrol. Eventually, after asking multiple times about the status of that repair, a spokesperson did tell us they are, quote, working to repair the guardrail as soon as possible. Kyle?
And I guess the question, Evan, is whether that device, fully functional, would have stopped the out-of-control snowplow.
Yeah, that's the big question here. Hopefully something we find out as that crash investigation unfolds. CDOT released video showing semi-trucks being stopped by these types of barriers. But of course, there are a lot of things involved here with a snowplow, potentially fully loaded snowplow going through it. That's the big question. Would that barrier or any barrier have been good enough to stop that?
Evan Krugel, thank you. Colorado's Republican Party continues to have its headquarters in Dysfunction Junction. After years of ruinous infighting, the chairwoman who came in promising stability and no drama has now lost her second vice chair, both of them saying they just couldn't work with her. According to our partners at Colorado Politics, former state legislator Richard Holtorf, remember that guy? He's going to leave his position with the state party at the end of the month. He says State Chair Britta Horn is, quote unquote, impossible to work with. He said in an email he's going to run for Washington County Commissioner instead. Holtorf replaced a guy named Darrell Phelan, who also resigned in frustration over Chairwoman Horn. Holtorf's seat is going to be filled at an upcoming state central committee meeting. This year's horrendous snowpack in the high country is not just hurting ski resorts. I mean, let's be honest, they have fat wallets anyway. The lack of work up there is really hitting blue-collar employees who often cobble together a few jobs to meet the high cost of living. And there's real fear in Summit County that longtime residents may leave and not come back even when the snow returns. That's why this week's Word of Thanks microgiving campaign supports the nonprofit Summit Resource Center. They help Coloradans up there with basic needs, including groceries. And they told me that they're worried that workers and families are going to give up hope that they can still make it in the high country, and they will leave town, which will only make the workforce issues up there worse in the coming years, because obviously eventually the snow and the tourists are going to return. They told me that they have trouble convincing people to accept their help because these are folks who are not typically unemployed, right? Some of them even have multiple jobs, and they assume that the food bank is for somebody else, somebody worse off. So they have to convince people to accept the free groceries, then use that savings to pay their rent, their utilities, their car payment, to do whatever they need to do to get through this really hard winter where workers have been seeing their jobs cut or their hours reduced if they've stayed on the job. Anything to stay put for next year. Scan the QR code on your screen or text the word thanks to 303-871-1491 to get the link to donate. Even $5 helps. 5 years of putting together your $5 donations has built a $17 million mountain of generosity for nonprofits in Colorado. I will never sit here and ask you to give alone, so as always, I'll match the first 50 donations of $5 to get us rolling. 7,000 of you have become the backbone of this giving program by making a monthly donation to the Word of Thanks Fund. You put in your info one time, select your donation amount, we automatically split it among all the nonprofits we feature, you get to stay off the email list and so forth. We expect that recurring giving to add almost $50,000 to each weekly campaign. Hey, got to give Congresswoman Lauren Boebert credit for being consistent. She consistently votes against funding projects in her own district and then takes credit for them anyway.
Denver was the place where tribes came together to trade, to negotiate, to share knowledge.
There's a new project trying to highlight the oldest voices in Denver. That's next. Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is back on her business of taking credit for funding projects in Colorado even when she votes against them. Boebert's team sent out a statement today touting nearly $15 million worth of infrastructure projects. 10 of those projects were earmarked in a funding bill passed last month that she voted yes on. $3 million worth of projects were in a funding bill signed by President Trump yesterday. And Boebert was the only Colorado Republican to vote against that funding package. She said it didn't include enough funding for ICE. The bill passed really narrowly, 217 to 214. I have asked Boebert about this in the past, taking credit for local projects that she votes against.
For the deciding vote, would you still have voted no and killed all of those projects in Colorado that you now take credit for?
Yes, and I would have worked for a
Thank
process.
you very much for
I would
that
have worked
answer.
for a process to get those over the line, but I worked to get those in, and I have had over 80 initiatives signed into law through the appropriations
I
process.
appreciate the direct
and
answer. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So Boebert has gone on to say that she prefers that these projects be broken up and voted on individually, but that's not been a hard and fast rule to earn her vote in this session. Let's bring in 9 News meteorologist Chris Bianchi. Man, we've been complaining about not a lot of snow in the Denver area, but like anything, could be worse.
It could be a lot worse, and you don't have to go too far to say that. Look at this in Salt Lake City. They've had about one Chris Bianchi fingernail worth of snow this winter. 0.1 inches of snow so far this winter season. In Denver, by the way, we had about 13 inches, but they average in Salt Lake City slightly more snow season to date than Denver does. So point being, Salt Lake City, 1/10 of an inch of snow. They average more snow than Denver does at this point in the winter season. Denver, 13.4 inches. So it could be worse, I suppose. Utah, Colorado, we're all basking under this ridge high pressure over the next few days. That'll keep us on the warm and dry side for the foreseeable future. Tomorrow, mid-60s in Denver, mostly sunny skies. And we're going to tack on yet another 60-degree day onto this winter season. We're going to be at 28 after tomorrow, and then 29, 30, 31, 32. So the warm stuff and the dry stuff continues. However, pattern flip. Middle of next week will drop temperatures, and fingers crossed, bring us some needed mountain snow.
With the gold rush, a new project looks at thousands of years of local history preceding that. Denver's getting ready for a special community celebration this weekend, one that reframes the city's origin story. Our Byron Reed has that.
Cultural traditions are passed down through generations. It's a practice Abby Chrisman is trying to preserve.
So the goal is to really tell the story of Denver's American Indian community.
Chrisman is Denver's principal city planner who's been working on a strategy to protect our past.
We've been working in partnership with the community for more than 3 years now to hear their stories.
She's part of the city's community planning and development landmark preservation team that recently released the We Are the Land series, an oral history project focusing on preserving the history and culture of Denver's American Indian community.
Talk with us, share with us, and start forming relationships and really look at how we're all interconnected here in Denver.
City leaders met with tribal communities to address the lasting impact of events like the Sand Creek Massacre, federal relocation programs, and the suppression of native languages.
To really start to think of Denver as a cultural landscape.
Colorado's home to traditionally 51 different tribes.
Dr. Jennifer Wolf is the Director of Native American Culture and Education with Denver Public Schools that will have students participating in the project this weekend.
We wanted them to feel like their voices matter, they're heard, and then also share these experiences with each other.
Both agree the project honors the voices of Denver's Native community to ensure their stories remain central to the city's cultural identity.
The term we call matakoyase means we are all related, means that we are all related to each other as people, and we are all related to our land.
For Next, I'm Byron Reed.
This Saturday's event will also mark the release of a documentary that came out of 3 years of collaboration between the city and the American Indian community in Denver. We're back with your feedback next. Thank you, Steve. Too much of the talk about the impact of this snowpack deficit this year, I think, is focused on the deep-pocketed ski resorts. Seems the concern should be for the working families that make our high country function and whether they're going to be able to get by on reduced hours or maybe even the loss of a job. The Summit Resource Center is helping, offering to cover the cost of groceries for struggling families, trying to convince them to stay in the community through this hard time. Scan the QR code on your screen or text the word THANKS to 303-871-1491 to join me in giving to support their work. The people that they're helping are hardworking folks who right now are making the decision on whether to uproot their families and perhaps not return to the high country, which of course you know would create a whole other issue next winter when presumably the snow will return and the workforce will be needed. Teresa writes tonight, is your Word of Thanks microgiving unique to 9 News? Do you know of any other news station in Colorado or the U.S. doing something similar? Teresa says it's awesome. Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's awesome because you all have given for 6 years now. I'm not aware of another weekly microgiving effort at stations around the country. But if somebody knows of something, let me know because we might be able to get a best practice from them. Dennis in Boulder says Marshall is kicking butt and taking names. Love his approach to political issues. He'll be busy this year. Yes, he will.